Hey guys, Chirag Shah here, founder of Lifestyle Westchester and broker of Life NY Real Estate. I'm here live with Noam Bramson. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
We're here at Life NY Studios. So this is the first of a series of interviews that's going to go over the course of a year, and this is in partnership with Leadership Westchester and Volunteer New York. So everyone knows about you as the politician, but you're also a husband and a father. So why don't we get to know a little bit about you, the person?
Well, thank you for the question. I think, like most people, I put husband and father before my profession. That's all how we identify ourselves, through our personal connections. So I grew up in Rochelle. My family moved there just a few months before I was born. Went through the public schools. Never really seriously thought about living anywhere else. Met my wife when she was living in Providence. And the first question I asked her after popping the questions was, will you move to New Rochelle? So I'm lucky that she said yes. And now we've got two kids who are 14 and 12. Our oldest is a freshman at New Rochelle High School. Our youngest is in 8th grade. And it's really a special experience to be able to raise them in my hometown. We are grateful not only for the good health and the good humor of our children and our extended family, but we also feel it's very special to be able to introduce them to different cultures and traditions, so all the exposure that you get from living in a diverse community. I feel like that was a benefit to me as I was growing up, and it's now wonderful to see my own children acquiring a broader understanding of what the world's all about because of where they're growing up.
So, we really talk about community a lot, right? And the thing that makes Westchester amazing is the diversity, is the towns, and everywhere kind of has a different flavor and stuff. So growing up in New Rochelle, and your kids now growing up, right, and being teens, what traditions have you seen that kind of have carried on through the generations?
Well, I think our community has always been diverse. It has welcomed people from every religious tradition, every racial and ethnic background, every socioeconomic stratum. And that's very much true today, just as true today as it was when I was growing up. And I think that's in part because many people self-select. They choose specifically to live in a community that is welcoming and embraces folks of every kind of circumstance. So I'm glad that that's a quality that has been preserved across generations. And as I said before, I think the lessons that you can get from your neighbors and your classmates can be as powerful as the formal instruction in the classroom. So being a child in a place like that, you can't help but soak up a broader and more complete perspective of what humanity is all about, and that serves you throughout your life. And I think I have to say, is particularly important now when there's so much commentary about the divisions that exist in our country, our inability to step into other people's shoes and imagine life from their perspective. Empathy. I think that's the key to human relationships. It's the key to sound decision making. It's the key to a just and decent society. And I would not claim, of course, that someone growing up in a more insular community is incapable of empathy. That would be a much too sweeping a claim. There are plenty of good people who emerge from every kind of city, town, and village.
Just talking about New Rochelle.
But it helps. It helps if you're immediately exposed to it in your own life. And so part of what motivates me in a public context is making sure that communities like ours have a future, that they continue to have a claim on our imagination, that people feel as though their decision to live in a community like this is valued, and that they feel like there's a reason to continue living there. And it adds a kind of moral urgency to challenges that might otherwise seem rather dry.
That's interesting. So, growing up in any kind of community, right? I grew up in Larchmont. My parents owned a local stationery store. We talked a little bit about that. And I grew up behind the counter. So being in Lifestyle Westchester and being able to support local businesses, places, non-for-profits really holds like a special place in my heart. So being a kid that grew up in New Rochelle and watching your kids grow up, I know everyone talks about like the redevelopment, but what does it mean to you as like the person to really, I feel like you are the person that's going to bring New Rochelle from here forward. There's a lot of different things going on there. So what does it mean to you, the person, to be able to partake and kind of spearhead this initiative?
So for me, it's thrilling. And I say that, by the way, recognizing that my positive opinion about economic development is not universally shared. There are plenty of folks in New Rochelle who have a different view, and I respect that. And it's part of the reason, by the way, why I think conversations like this are very important, because I do want to emphasize that there are reasons for doing what we're doing. So why do I think it's important to New Rochelle's future to have redevelopment?
Before we get to New Rochelle's future, no, what does it mean to you? You know, you're a kid that grew up here. You grew up in the local schools. Your family's from here. Like, personally, there's that spot in your heart that, like, you know, you grow up as a kid and you're excited and you're like, you know, if I ever have the opportunity, I could change this, or I'd like to see things this way. Like it has to have some sort of significant impact in your life to kind of just watch all this happen.
Yeah, so look, I'm loyal to my city. You know, just what you said. I mean, this is where I grew up. This has always been part of my identity. And I want everyone who lives in New Rochelle to feel proud of that. When they say, I'm from New Rochelle, I want them to feel good about every aspect of the community that they're describing. And it has been my feeling that while we have some extraordinary assets, and we've already talked about a few of them, and you could add to the list our great neighborhoods and our parks and our shoreline and so on, that the aspect of New Rochelle that has underperformed since I was a kid has been our downtown area, which had its heyday back in the 30s and 40s and 50s before I was alive. I've heard the stories, I've seen the pictures, but it's not in my lived experience. And so the comparative challenges in the downtown have held the community back. And so for me, the idea that every part of New Rochelle, including the downtown, could have life and energy and cultural vibrancy and be a place that appeals to the whole spectrum of people who live within our city and within our region, that's a great prospect. And you're right, the fact that I grew up in town lends to it a kind of special energy. Like, I really want our city to succeed. And to see us now in a position where we're making significant progress, where the trend lines are so good, is really, for me, enormously exciting. We need a few more years to execute. You know, we've got a great plan in place. It's on track, but I think it'll be a little while longer before the benefits are fully realized in terms of the physical and cultural and economic energy that we are trying to bring to our core business district.
So I'm a person, I step 5 years, 10 years into the future. You and I are standing, having the same conversation in downtown New Rochelle. What does it look like? What does it feel like?
So I think if our plans are successful, and I believe they will
be optimistic.
Sure. When our plans are successful, I think you will have an area that has a greater density of positive activity, more things going on, more people eating in restaurants, more people going to and from stores, more people walking from home to work. Well, not just a commuter culture, although that's part of it, because we've got this great access to mass transit at our train station, which is right in the heart of downtown, but also walking around the block to the store, or using a bike share, or getting on an electric van that will be circulating around the downtown. So a whole series of mobility options in an area that is walkable and exciting. And, you know, so in addition to just building things, because I think that in and of itself is a hollow goal, it's the quality of what you're building, and it's the relationship of the built environment to what we experience at the street level. So our zoning code includes a whole series of prescriptions about best planning practices. And that can sound really dry and boring, but it's meaningful.
Real estate guy.
It's meaningful. I mean, it's the amount of glazing at the ground level. It's the setbacks, which are pegged to the geometry of the road. It's attention to the vistas that you see from a distance. It's attention to significant corners.
Term, it's like curb appeal.
Yes. And here's the thing. When you walk down a street, you instinctively find it either comfortable or uncomfortable, attractive or unattractive. And
that feeling is created.
And sometimes you can't even put your finger on exactly why that is, but planners over a period of decades have learned what are the ingredients that add up to a walkable, pleasant experience. And all of those are hardwired into our zoning code. So as the development occurs, the fabric of New Rochelle will be enhanced and improved and will better reflect those planning principles. So you asked the question, what will it feel like to be in downtown New Rochelle? So I think you will have an area that, yes, is greater in its scale. There'll be more high-rises, there'll be more new development, but also preservation of older structures and a ground-level experience that is human in its scale and feels comfortable. I think you'll see greater street-level activity, hopefully 24-hour activity if we're successful in attracting a bigger commercial base, including office space. We think residential will be the leading edge, but the other things will follow. And an area, by the way, that also is sensitive in its environmental impacts. You know, we usually don't think of new towers by the train station as environmental initiatives, and yet They are far more energy efficient, far less greenhouse gas intensive than other forms of housing. So there's that aspect of it too, that transit-oriented growth is green in its regional and global impact. So all of that is kind of wrapped up in what we do in the downtown. And from a regional perspective, New Rochelle has a chance to kind of answer the question which employers ask: where are my workers going to live and how are they going to get to work? And so providing a good answer to that is part of the regional competitiveness equation.
How is thought all these little details out?
Yeah, and it's important. And so you look at it locally, you look at it regionally, you look at it globally. This form of growth, this kind of transit-oriented growth, well-planned, well thought-through, I think is absolutely vital to our future. I do also like to remind people, though, because we recognize New Rochelle has both urban and suburban characteristics, that our goal is not to build everywhere. All of these growth objectives are concentrated in our downtown core and along what we call the North Avenue corridor. Now we're doing something through the state's downtown revitalization initiatives for the Lincoln Avenue corridor as well. But through the bulk of New Rochelle's land area, the goal is preservation, preserving classic suburban land use characteristics, single-family homes, green space. So it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. It's preservation where it makes sense, and it's growth where it makes sense. And I think most people in New Rochelle are excited about that and feel positively about the direction in which we're headed. But again, as I said before, I do recognize that other people have competing views, and I respect that. And part of my job is to sort of talk this through with the people I represent so that we all understand what's the objective that we're aiming for.
I know from a lot of the business owners we speak with, they're very optimistic about what's coming to New Rochelle, all the change. So I think for everyone watching, when you walk down the street and you just kind of look at yourself, you look at your spouse, your kids, wow, this feels good. There's like it's interesting to know there's a science behind it, right? From all these little things. So we've talked about the redevelopment, we've talked a little about you, but I think one thing that we both share is our philanthropic nature, like our need to want to give back to the community. So, let's talk a little bit about Volunteer New York. You're a huge advocate of Volunteer New York. Lisa speaks volumes about you. Tony speaks volumes about you. Why Volunteer New York? Like, how would you sum it up in a few words?
So I think Volunteer New York is one of the irreplaceable assets for our region. It's not just the individuals you mentioned, Lisa and Tony, who are terrific people. And I'm not just saying that because Tony's sitting about 10 feet away from us. Lisa in absentia has been, I'll say, a friend for 25 years and happens to be a New Rochelle resident, although that's simply coincidence. Volunteer New York, more than any other single organization, I think unleashes the human capital in our region. It gives people who have the impulse to serve, the capacity to serve, a roadmap for how they can make a difference in their neighbors' lives. We all benefit from that. We benefit on both sides of the equation. If you are a recipient of volunteer services, your life can be enhanced. And if you are giving volunteer services, I think most volunteers would immediately testify that it's been soul nourishing for them. And yet we also know that municipalities as an institution, a city government, we're not necessarily very good at mobilizing volunteers, at organizing them, at identifying service opportunities. So we were really thrilled to partner with Volunteer New York a couple of years ago and create a partnership through which Volunteer New York focuses on the service opportunities that exist in New Rochelle, highlights them, partners with local not-for-profits and service organizations to make sure that as many of them as possible are included in Volunteer New York's database. We have a distinct portal for New Rochelle. It's volunteernewyork.org/New
Spell it out
Rochelle.
for the simple people like
Volunteer New York, spell out New York.org/New Rochelle. It's kind of a subset of the overall Volunteer New York
We'll
web
put
presence.
it in the comments for everyone. So if someone wants to get involved and they want to join the New Rochelle initiative, that's where they specifically
That's where they can go. And by the way, there's a service opportunity coming up just around the corner. We have our annual Thanksgiving Parade, which is one of the most beloved traditions in New Rochelle. That's taking place, I believe, on Saturday, November 17th. And we need volunteers to help organize and manage the parade. So if anyone's interested, they can find out more by logging onto that website. And it's been a terrific partnership, I think a model for other municipalities in the region. that similarly want to unlock the potential of their own populations and give people a road forward for service. And I have great admiration for the folks who have helped put this together and continue to make Volunteer New York such a successful group.
You know, I'll tell you what I find really interesting about Volunteer New York, right? I find volunteering, it's either an experience we want to have, right, or something we want to recreate. And I always tell the people, to make it simple, it's like picking off of a menu. You know, you have all these different opportunities. So, right, it's not a one-size-fits-all model.
That's exactly right. So depending on your interests, depending on the availability of your time, depending upon your skill set, your age, you know, are you working together as a family? Are you on your own? There is something for just about everyone. And it also highlights the fact that we all are capable of doing something good for our neighbors. We're all capable of contributing in some way to the common good.
That's what being in a community is all about.
Exactly, exactly. And it's a far more rewarding way to be in a community than simply, you know, putting your head on a pillow at the end of the day. Really being present in your neighbors' lives, I think, provides enormous satisfaction.
I think the saying at Volunteer New York is, you know, the person volunteering gets more out of it than the people you volunteer for, you know. And I'm a huge Tony Robbins fan, and, you know, Tony always says the secret to living is giving. And I found we have a partnership, too, with Volunteer New York, and that's part of the reason that we wanted to do this series, right? We wanted to tell people more about Volunteer New York, bring people good, positive news. And, you know, the last thing I want to talk about is Leadership Westchester. It's something both you and I share in common. And, you know, it's just a truly remarkable journey. And up until I'd met David Severance through my real estate board, and he was a consultant, I had no idea about it. So how'd you come across the program, and when did you go through it?
So I had heard about Leadership Westchester from several friends and colleagues, all of whom swore by it, said it was a transforming experience for them.
Did you apply too?
Well, I applied after I heard those testimonials. I don't think I would have been aware of it or inclined to be a part of it had it not been from hearing from so many people whose judgment I respected. You know, when you get that kind of universal affirmation, you figure, maybe there's something
like,
I might be listening to.
Start wondering, what is this place?
Exactly. So I did sign on. I will admit with just a touch of skepticism, because it's not the kind of discussion that I'm accustomed to participating in.
Especially not on the East Coast. It's more of a Western-based thinking, I would say.
I wouldn't have known, not having lived on the West Coast myself, I wouldn't have known the comparison, but that's interesting. So. And I'm very glad I did. You know, in my year, an interesting group of people from whom I learned, reflecting all sorts of different professional and personal orientations. I think David Severance, who moderates the program, is exceptionally skilled, just a terrific person for structuring a conversation, knowing when to interject, knowing when to hold back. Helping to pull people out.
It's kind of like Yoda is the answer to everything.
Yeah, he's really great. And I think, you know, you recognize it takes a special kind of personality and talent to be a good facilitator of a discussion like that. And for me at least, and I think different people get different things out of the program, but clarifying a sense of mission and making it explicit has been helpful for me in focusing on what's important and what's not important. And I think has helped me to be a better mayor. And I hope also has helped me strike the right balance between personal and professional in my life broadly. So I'm grateful for the experience.
Yeah, I would say, you know, kind of the same thing, right? It makes you deepen your just mindset and wanting to make an impact and be part of a community. And I think, in my mind, I think Leadership Westchester signifies everything that Westchester County is about, right? It talks about connecting different people from different economic backgrounds, just all different walks of life that all come together with the same sense of just serving and caring. And, you know, you'll leave there with some amazing friendships, right? Yeah. You learn something new about yourself, and it's just a journey. And like we, in these series of interviews, want to create awareness around it, because I'm pretty good, I would say, about knowing kind of what goes on, especially in leadership programs and stuff like that. I never heard of it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you had kind of the same thing. So, Tony, we're looking at you now. So this part of this is just getting the word out there and just letting people know. You know, each interview, someone will share a different journey and a process. And Tony, where do they learn more about this?
Leadership Westchester information is available at volunteernewyork.org/leadership.
So you're going to add in the stream the link to volunteering in New Rochelle, the link to Leadership Westchester. So for the people watching, after we're done, we could do that. And let's see if anyone has any questions. Anyone ask any questions?
Yeah, what are some of the new companies interested in New Rochelle?
So our master developer is RXR Realty. They are one of the largest commercial entities in the New York region. Their chairman, Scott Reckler, also happens to be the chair of the Regional Plan Association, which is a highly respected public service group. So he has, I think, a perspective that extends just beyond dollars and cents and really thinks about the nature of the communities that he's involved in building. They've been wonderful partners, but I do want to stress it's not just a master developer that's working in New Rochelle. We've put together a framework, combination of exclusive opportunities on publicly owned sites, the new zoning code that I mentioned earlier, and a completed generic environmental review that makes it easier for anyone to invest in New Rochelle. And so since the adoption of that framework, we've got a dozen or more companies that are making serious real estate plays in the city. And that's very exciting. We're not at the stage yet where we're prepared to announce that retailer X is coming in or office tenant Y is coming in. We hope and expect those announcements will roll as projects rise out of the ground and
So
are
can we
completed.
count on you to come back here and share that with us?
I'll be back as often as you like.
All right, that sounds good. Any other questions?
Sure. This one's from Elisa Harris-Keston. Are there any regional opportunities to take the lessons learned and tested in New Rochelle to benefit an even broader audience?
Great question, Elisa Keston.
I could count on her for that.
Yeah, we can indeed.
It's deep.
So yes, the model that we adopted in New Rochelle, which I mentioned a moment ago, this kind of three-legged stool, master development agreement, zoning code, generic environmental review, could be replicated in almost any similar community. Now, obviously, some of the details would be customized. It's not as though you can, in a cookie-cutter fashion, take something that works in one city and adopt it wholesale in
Of
another
course, because
city.
there are people involved.
Right. But the basic framework absolutely is portable. And as I go to business and planning conferences, it's exciting to see that the New Rochelle model is increasingly being held up as a powerful framework for other communities. I think that is one of the reasons that New Rochelle was successful in receiving the state's Downtown Revitalization Initiative. That is a $10 million grant. It's awarded to one community in each of New York State's 10 regions annually.
Wow.
So we were competing, I think, in a 7-county region with dozens of other municipalities.
That's a lot of places.
A lot of places, highly competitive and highly coveted because it's enormously
It's a lot of
valuable.
money.
So we were thrilled to get it. And again, this is not the only reason we received it, but I think a big part of the case that we made is that by investing in us, you're investing not just in New Rochelle, but in a proof of concept that is applicable to many other communities. And we're happy to be at the cutting edge.
That's great. Tony?
Last question. In your own personal opinions, who would you recommend looking into Leadership Westchester? What types of people?
Well, I think almost anyone who is in a position of public responsibility, I think, could benefit from it. I think people in significant corporate roles. I think anyone who is trying to think about refocusing their career might benefit from Leadership Westchester. I think someone who has felt frustrated because they have an impulse to service which they haven't been able to satisfy in a way that feels right to them, feels meaningful to them, could benefit from it. So, I'm in trying to answer that question, I'm reflecting on the folks who were in my own class as well as those who have been in other classes, and it's been quite a cross section of people who are involved in the Westchester community. So. And by the way, people in politics and government have been a distinct minority of participants. So I would not want people to get the impression, just because we're talking about it, that this is primarily
No, I was actually
focused.
surprised when you
Yeah.
said you went through the program.
Yeah, so this is not primarily a government thing. I was more the exception rather than
I always
the
like
rule,
to say I look at you as there's more of the person. And
which I take as a compliment, so thank you.
So, I thought I could share my own experience, and it's just, I would say anyone who's, regardless of your walk of life, if you wake up and you just kind of like that feeling like something's missing, right? You're going to work, you're doing well, but you just kind of want to serve at a greater purpose. You really don't know what your purpose is, and you're looking to kind of fit in the community, just kind of learn more about yourself, right? I would say kind of more with like feelings and intuition, and a lot of people that I know in my class that went through it started here and it kind of went around full circle. Mm-hmm. You always have those few people that are definitely in corporate jobs. They don't know what they're doing here. But by the end, I found they had some of the best, most profound experiences.
And, I think part of it is many of us lead exceptionally busy lives. And sometimes we don't carve out space for just a little bit of self-reflection. And so even apart from the specific curriculum, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but you know what I mean, that's presented at Leadership Westchester. Just the notion that through 10 sessions or whatever the number is, you're going to take half a day or a full day.
For yourself.
And, to really sort of think through what you're all about. And not just be consumed by the minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour responsibilities that are constantly pressing for your attention.
Text messages, emails, phone
Exactly.
calls.
So I think just that in and of itself can be useful if you make the most of that time. And of course, it means that you will be much more productive on the other 29 out of 30 days of the month when you're not there, because you will have sort of focused your attention more intently on what really matters.
It's like why can't you take 10 days for yourself in an entire year, right? So, any
Indeed.
other questions?
There's one more.
One more just came in.
Yeah.
How many people are expected to move into New Rochelle with all of the current projects and new buildings?
So our total build-out projection is for about 6,300 apartments, which is quite significant in a community with a population of 80,000. The total population, I'll use a round number, is probably around 10,000 that would come out of those apartments. To anticipate a question that wasn't posed explicitly, but I often hear in the community, is what is this going to mean for our school system?
Yeah.
We thought through that question very, very carefully and rigorously analyzed it before adopting the plan. We wanted to make sure we had a good handle on student generation, so we looked at the lived experience from the projects that have already been completed and occupied in New Rochelle. We looked at similar projects in similar communities, and on that basis came up with a formula that projects student generation from studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and so forth. So our best estimate is that about 350 kids will come out of these developments. Those will be spread over 13 grades in a district that has 11,000 children, just to put the numbers in perspective. Even so, we want to make sure that we can accommodate that growth. So at a minimum, all of the projects need to spin off annual revenue for the school district that covers the marginal costs of school children. In most cases, that escalates very quickly, so there's actually a considerable net positive for the school district. Plus, we looked at the spatial constraints of the school buildings that would be affected to determine when would tipping points be reached that might necessitate classroom construction. And from that, backed into something we called a fair share mitigation fund. This is a one-time payment that developers need to make to cover any capital and infrastructure needs that the schools may have.
Never knew that.
So we really thought it through very carefully. And I also try to remind people, the idea that people might want to come to New Rochelle and live in New Rochelle and send their kids to our schools, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It means that our community is an attractive magnet, provided that we're planning for it carefully and we're anticipating the impact, so that the experience of those of us who are
It's not
already here.
overpopulation and overcrowded, and
Exactly.
the people that are here not losing the New Rochelle they know.
I mean, how do we start this discussion? I've got 2 kids, both of whom are in the public schools. I don't want them in an overcrowded classroom. I don't want their educational experience to suffer. So just speaking as a citizen, I care about this enormously, and I totally get it why some people have concerns. I've lived it. But I really do believe that we've thought this through carefully in advance. We've planned it out in such a way that those of us who are already here are going to benefit from the growth and not be negatively impacted by it. And that's the name of the game.
Thank you. Is that it, guys?
There's one more that did come in. I know
One more.
someone said 30, but
That's
does
okay.
the city of New Rochelle have any programs in place that encourage local businesses to give back to the community they service?
Well, let me first point out, that's a great question, that the Volunteer New York portal that I described is not just open to individuals, it's open to businesses, it's open to institutions. Very often businesses will organize their employees for a day of service. So Businesses who want to get involved, I would strongly encourage them to use the same opportunities that exist to residents. We have other programs such as the Adopt a Street program, which lets businesses assume responsibility for sort of supplementary cleanup and so on commercial thoroughfares. We have had businesses contribute to the community through organizations like the Chamber of Commerce or the Business Improvement District that sponsor a whole series of events and cultural activities. So there are no shortage of ways for businesses to get involved, and we encourage that.
So here's a thought. We have a toy drive coming up, right? December 9th from 12 to 4 at Simon the Westchester. And really, we do a lot of partnerships with businesses, the community. All the toys get donated locally. So maybe we could all have a conversation of how we could get the city of New Rochelle involved, some of the businesses involved. People put out boxes, we collect toys, and there is a local place somewhere in New Rochelle that we could donate them. So the people watching, if you guys are interested, it sounds like something you'd be interested in getting involved in.
Always happy to talk about ways that we can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a lot of kids that could benefit from it, and to answer the person's question, it's a win-win for everybody. So I know his time is valuable. Any other last-minute questions? No. Well, thank you guys for watching, and we'll put the playback up. You could look for the full video on our website, lifestylewestchester.com. As well, we'll be posting who the next interview person is and some more questions. So thank you for your time and watching in.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time.
Really a
today.
pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.